Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to see you all here today. And my name is Alex Marga, and I am the Director of Customer Success here at Playbook UX. And I am super excited to go through this webinar with you today. In the chat, we do have our chat support team, so feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar that you have. We'll be answering questions at the end as well. And just a couple of housekeeping, just to let you know, you will be receiving a link to watch this video back after the webinar is over. And you can always reach out to us on our website if you click on the little blue button in the bottom right corner with the support. Their chat support team can answer any questions for you. We also upload our webinars to our YouTube page. So if you do want to check back there, we usually upload them a couple of days later. So feel free to check out our previous webinars as well as this one when it gets loaded. So we'll go ahead and get started. So give me just one moment here. Alrighty, perfect. And can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Perfect. Great. So today we are going to be talking about crafting questions. And I'm so excited to bring this to you. So let me get my screen all situated here. I apologize. Let me fix that real quick. Awesome. Alrighty, great. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about crafting questions. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the basics of things to watch out for while you're crafting great questions. But we're not just going to go through that. We're also going to be talking about finding goals for your studies, what type of studies you should run, how to actually craft questions that give participants thoughtful answers, and then most importantly, also how to stay unbiased in the process. We'll also talk about testing our questions and how to make sure that they're working properly and staying unbiased in moderated studies specifically. So, first, let's get started talking about goals. So, recently here at Playbook UX, we have been working on updating our tester experience. And I'm going to be talking about that throughout this webinar. So, we wanted to get an idea of what testers thought of our landing page and the experience of signing up for an account. But before we could do anything, we need to stop and ask ourselves, why? Why are we doing this? What is the goal of this? So sure, it's nice to have nice things and make our website look good and presentable, but we need to understand the purpose of this page. So the landing page, if successful, should be informative enough to entice somebody to want to join the platform. So with that in mind, I can actually come up with a goal for my redesign. I want to increase the number of recruited testers with my design. So now I have a great starting point for my research to begin. Finding a goal to work towards is fundamental to good research. You want to have something guiding you forward and informing your decisions. Going into a study blind or without a purpose can risk biased research. Just because something is important to you doesn't mean it's important to your customers. And designing and building a feature without a valid purpose can be a huge time waste if it backfires. So, goals are extremely important and can come from different places. So in the example that I gave, we spoke about increasing testers to improve our customer experience. And this is just one example of a goal that you might have. Maybe some companies want to decrease the amount of drop-offs from a shopping cart to checkout flow. Or other companies might want to decrease the amount of support tickets that they're receiving and drive more volume to their help center by improving their chatbot. These are all great examples of different goals that can be established before starting your research. So always try to find an actionable goal before you get started crafting questions. So when I do my research, I like to write down my goal in a study guide to make sure that I keep it in mind the entire time I'm doing my whole process. Now, I want to warn you if you haven't done this before, some companies have established reports to fill out prior to launching a study or have a specific guide on how to do this. So always make sure to check in with your team on their own process. But for me, I start a study guide from scratch by stating my objective. I want to increase testers on our platform by 20% by improving the tester landing page and sign up form. So now that I have my goal in mind, I need to start building out my study in as a whole. So first, there's two things I need to decide before I start writing my questions. Number one, who am I looking to target and get feedback from? And number two, what type of test should I run? Your participants will vary depending on the goal that you set. So, for example, if you're working on a banking app for businesses and you want to drive traffic to your startup program, choosing an audience of small business owners, CEOs, accountants, etc., people that would be involved in that process will most likely be helpful for your study. You can even dig deeper to get more specific with screener questions. So, in the example of finding individuals who regularly use grocery apps to have their groceries delivered, this is a great screener question to ask if you're a grocery store trying to improve your shopping cart and checkout experience. So, in my example, with the tester experience, I want to look for a wide variety of individuals who have either little experience doing user testing or have done many user tests in the past to get an opinion from both sides. In my example, I don't necessarily need to limit my audience a lot because we will be talking to testers doing the actual test in that process. So, I'll leave my audience wide open. Finally, I need to determine what type of study to run. So, in there are many different types of studies that all serve different purposes and have different ways of asking questions. One of the most common types is called a first impression test. This study will give you a better idea of how a participant thinks and feels about the website, prototype, or product that they're looking at. First impression tests are a great first step to designing early stage prototypes or getting a baseline of what people think of your current design, because they'll be judging the content based on how it looks and is presented to them and less about the functionality of the product. So, this is a great test to run if you have a prototype in the early stages or a design that you want to see what people think of before you start actually building it out. Now, if you want to know if your product works and makes sense, you'll want to run a usability study, which is another very common type of test that people run. In this study, the participant will walk through steps to use the website, prototype, or product and communicate their understanding of how it works. Compared to first impression tests, usability studies are best done mid to end project development, as you will only want to test the designs that have passed the first impression test. There's no use in testing designs that don't work and building out something that isn't going to be good for your audience. So, we'll talk more about these two types of studies throughout this webinar, but I want to stress that these are just two out of many different types of studies that you can run. If you're looking to understand your audience more, their needs, their experiences on and off of your platform, you can run a persona test. You can dive deeper into experiences like chatbot or shopping cart or phone apps, etc., and specialize studies to test if these programs work. If you're not quite sure what type of test you want to run, we have I am so sorry, my voice is disappearing. We have a bunch of different resources on Playbook UX to kind of help you with that. So in the chat, I'm actually going to post a link to our Playbook UX Academy, which has a lot of different resources. And this specific page shows you many different types of tests that you can run and examples of questions for those types of tests. So I'm posting that in the chat right now. So let's get back to my example of the tester landing page. I first want to make sure that my landing page is enticing to sign up to be a tester. So I want to run a first impression test to see how people perceive the site as it is now. This will help me understand areas that are working well and others that need improvement as I move forward. So after adding that to my sheet, I can officially begin creating my questions. One other note just to mention, I'm also going to put into the chat a document of an example of a study guide that I've done for similar tests like this. So feel free to use this in the future if you'd like. You can reference this. It is read only, but you can also copy that if you are doing a similar type of study on landing pages or parts of your website. This is a great first step for first impression studies. So I'm going to post that right now as well. Alrighty. So I'm going to say a statement that is going to sound very obvious, but I really like to start here because I think it's one of the most important things to highlight. Your participants cannot read your mind. And the reason I highlight this is because it is one of the most common mistakes I see in research studies is vague questions that do not provide directions. So, in the chat, I would love to hear from you. How often have you had a participant race through a website or race through a prototype because they didn't realize it was not like a real app or website or program yet? Has anybody ever experienced that when doing research? For myself, this has definitely happened to me before on similar studies where I have given information to my participants and they have not understood that what they were looking at was not a real product and ended up moving very, very quickly through the flow as it was sort of going forward into in each question. Aldolfo, thank you. I know I see that, Jamie. Perfect. Yes, it's probably a very common thing that has happened. So the reason I highlight this is because this has absolutely happened. And I think it's also due to the fact that my questions are just not specific enough. So to start, my Alex's rules of thumb for today, number one, be as specific as possible with your questions and don't be afraid of context and directions. Think about the type of material that you want and how you would go about obtaining that. Do you want the participants to answer questions before they start the study? Do you want them to walk through a study slowly? These are both possible, but you will want to make sure that the participant understands what they're doing so they don't instinctively move forward. So, when coming up with questions, give instructions to direct them through each step. Use phrases like without clicking and scroll up and down, but don't click on questions where you want them to look over something. This will help the user slow down and not charge forward through each web page. For my tester landing page, I want to know where they think the tester information would live on the website. So I might ask, where would you go to find more information on becoming a tester? So my participant, after reading over the prompt, may take a moment to look for the correct response and then click on the area they think that would take them to that spot. And I really don't want this to happen for many reasons. If I had a follow up question about that experience, they would now be ahead of me and potentially reviewing the information without instruction. Or worse, they may have clicked on the wrong spot, which will only make the next few questions confusing if they can't navigate back. Now, if I ask the same question but add without clicking, where would you go to find more information on becoming a tester? This gives the participant a specific instruction that they should not click anything, but they're being asked to locate something so they can answer the question without moving forward. This keeps them on the correct path and in a spot where they can answer potential follow up questions. Going back to my example about prototypes, as a researcher, it's best to assume that your participants may not have experience looking at prototypes or different types of websites. So, providing context can help set the stage for parts of the study that may otherwise confuse them. If I have a prototype on Figma that I want to show my participants, I might set up a task or question that says, on the next page, you'll be taken to a prototype of our design. Once the prototype is loaded, the following questions will prompt you on how to move forward. This will allow my participants inside knowledge that their screen will change and may not operate the same as they are used to, but that the questions will provide instructions. With this, you're building trust with your participants and thus making the research better. Now, before we move forward, I do want to point out that some researchers like to keep things vague to see how people interact without instruction. This is totally at your discretion, and it's a valid form of research. Depending on the nature of your product, audience, and information you're looking to gather, you can ask more open-ended questions and see how a participant flows through a site, which can test how intuitive or easy to use the site is. That being said, I usually recommend doing this type of study in a moderated session where conversation and flow can happen more naturally instead of an unmoderated study. But we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So, for my tester landing page, I want to run a first impression study. So, what types of questions should I ask? I want to learn more about how the participant feels about the design. So, I want to stick to asking questions about what they think and feel about certain aspects of the page. So these are some questions that I kind of came up with before to start my process. So, do you find this website helpful? Describe this section in 3 keywords. On a scale of 1 to 10, how easy is it to navigate through the site? What would you improve about the website? You'll notice that with my questions, they're not necessarily asking if it's functional, but rather just looking at it on a surface level. And these are all great questions for first impression tests. However, These are not good questions yet. Why? Because of Alex's rules of thumb when crafting questions. Number two, don't lead your participant down a path. This will create bias. Listen, we're all human. We all have preferences and ideas of what looks good or makes it works for us. But in research, it's important to get as much of your opinion out the door as possible so you can allow the participants to make up their own mind about the content they are seeing. So, using keywords like helpful or easy in a question or asking them a yes or no question might put the thought into the participant's head before they had a chance to form their own. Or even worse, it might make them feel uncomfortable sharing their opinion if they didn't find the information helpful or easy. Suddenly, there's a secret expectation that the participants have to make you feel good about your research and your design. And yes or no questions often lack answers with substance, as most individuals might not want to answer the reason why they chose what they chose. So, when crafting questions, you want to frame questions in a way that don't presuppose what the person is going to say, and you want to find a balance between them. So, you can ask questions like, what part of the web page was the easiest to understand, as long as you follow it up with, what part of the website was the most challenging to understand. So, having a dual kind of perspective will help you with your research. Another thing you can do is instead of asking things like, how easy is this website to navigate? Say things, keep it more broad. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did you find the process of navigating the website? And you can use easy for the scales of between easy and difficult. So, as you start to configure your questions and work on being less biased, you may encounter a different type of issue, which is asking vague or very, very open ended questions can often confuse and overwhelm your participants. So, for example, a question like, tell me what you think of this page. This is a question that can lead participants to either overthink about the page they're looking at, maybe they might stop in their tracks and not quite sure how to move forward, or it will prompt them to describe what they're seeing without really giving much of an opinion. I've seen studies where during questions like this, participants will answer with phrases like, yeah, it's fine, or I like this, without really diving deeper into what it evokes in them. So, questions like, describe this page in 3 words, or what draws your attention the most on this web page, give the participant a little bit more direction to answer more thoughtfully and often lead to more interesting and detailed insights. So, with all of this in mind, I can go back to the questions that I had originally and make some minor changes. So, what is the most helpful part of the website? I added what is the least helpful part of the website as a way to kind of balance out those two. I kept my describe this section in 3 keywords, but I changed my next question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how did you find the process of navigating the website? Made it a lot more broad and not putting that word in their head. And then, of course, I also kept what would you improve about the website, which is always a helpful question. So we were talking a lot about first impression studies. So when I run usability, like with usability tests, the same rules of thumb apply, but your questions will be geared more towards how the product works. So in this case, providing instructions becomes much more important as you want to make sure your participant is moving through the product in the order that you choose. So where would you find information on startup bank accounts? Click on the section of the site you think is correct. This will prompt the person to move forward, click on the things that they're looking for, and help them understand the product as they're working through it. When I run usability studies, I also like to ask questions before clicking and follow up after clicking to see if it met expectations. So, for example, without clicking, what information did you expect to find on the create an account page? And then afterwards, go ahead and click on create an account. What did you think of the way it was laid out compared to your previous expectations? This just gives me valuable insight into what they're thinking before and after. Of course, with usability tests, you can also use questions that can be used for first impression tests. Asking things like, "Did you find anything surprising about this page?" or what draws your attention the most on this page?" can help you understand how the user is understanding the product as well. So now that we've talked a little bit about crafting some questions, I want to stress that coming up with questions can be challenging for anyone. So don't be discouraged if you're having trouble figuring out wording, figuring out a good place to start. And we here are at Playbook UX are always happy to help you. And there's actually a few ways that you can utilize our platform to your advantage in this case. So as you're seeing on your screen right now, this is what you would see when you're setting up an unmoderated study. And there are two links that you can click on: popular questions or use a template. So first we'll talk about popular questions. You can click on this to see a list of questions that researchers often use in a variety of different types of studies. So you can browse by study or by study type. So you can use the drop down to find a specific type, or you can browse all of the questions, select ones that you want to add to your study, and then afterwards you'll be given the opportunity to edit the wording, change them around, duplicate them, delete them to your leisure. And this makes the study more of your own, while giving you a good starting off point. If you want just a full great starting off point, you can even import one of Playbook UX's templates, where we've compiled a list of common types of tests, including both usability and first impression tests here. And you can select a full template to add to your study and then edit as you please as well. So this will include multiple different questions kind of in a row that makes sense for most types of studies. And this is a really great way to start. I am so sorry about that. If you and your colleague launch a lot of successful tests on the platform, you can even save those questions in a workspace template as well and import those for future studies. So check in with your colleagues and check their templates to see if there's something that you can use for your future studies as well. So now that we have some questions, once you have them put together, you might be asking yourself, how do I know if these questions are usable? So, the best way to check if your questions work is honestly just running a study. So, many researchers will create what is called a pilot test. And this is a one-person study that will give you an idea of how successful the questions are. This will only give you one participant to work with, and you can watch over their response. You can analyze how they answered the questions, make notes on what worked and what didn't, and then you can duplicate your study and make changes to the questions before launching it to a wider audience. If you find that the study went really well and you didn't need to make any changes, you can just add participants to the same study and just start working off of that exact same study with a wider audience as well. The pilot test process is a super helpful way to ensure you're not wasting your time and energy analyzing research that is not going to be helpful, because there's nothing worse than getting a whole bunch of videos back to review and then watching through them and realizing that it's just not going to work for the research that you're working on. Finally, if you find that your study goes well and the questions were successful, consider saving your study as a workspace template. Not only will this make it easier for you to find good questions later when you launch other studies, but you'll also be helping out your colleagues in the process. So if you have questions on how to do that, feel free to reach out to our team and we're happy to show you how to save those. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about moderated studies and staying unbiased during them. And I consider moderated studies to be a completely different ballpark in the matter of being unbiased. So, with moderated studies, you'll be face to face with the participant as they are working through each question. So, you can have more natural conversations and ask follow up questions as you go along. But staying unbiased in a moderated study is a whole lot more difficult than you might expect. There's a lot of pressure to fill the silence or help your participant as they struggle through a part of the study. And these can be times where saying something can actually hurt your research. Don't feel like you have to jump in on uncomfortable silences. Remember, you are testing your product to see how easy it is to navigate or how easy it is to understand. And by providing too much guidance, you're not allowing the participants to work at their own pace. Now, if they are struggling with a section that is not directly relevant to your research, you can lightly set them back on track, but remember to allow room for them to figure things out on their own. In addition to this, you want to be careful with how you ask follow up questions. You might find yourself wanting to ask things like, did you find it more challenging than the other part? When asking them to compare two things. Just like with the keywords from before, you're now putting an idea in the participant's head that the second part was more challenging. I am so sorry. So, like I said, you're putting it in their head that you're finding the second part more challenging than the first, and whether they think that or not. Sometimes giving the participants space to answer, even if it takes a little bit longer, can help you get a better response. So try avoiding answering your own question in a question. For example, do you think maybe you did it this way because blank? This assumes the answer of the participant and makes it harder to get an answer from the participant that is their own. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Staying unbiased in a moderated interview is a lot harder than you think, and it's a skill to unlearn. It is definitely something that I've done before. I know countless researchers have told me that they've done it before as well. If you slip up and make a note of it for the future. Don't It is okay. Everyone is human and will make mistakes in this process, but as long as you learn from those mistakes and work towards becoming more unbiased in the future, it is not for naught. So, with that, we've actually reached the end of our webinar today. So, by employing these rules of thumb and working on how you present questions to your participants, you'll start to see the fruit of your labor in the responses that you receive. Better questions will reveal better results, and you get closer to accomplishing your goals with every step of the process there. So thank you so much. I am so sorry here at the end. My voice just decided to go away. I apologize for that, but I really appreciate you joining us today for this webinar. This is something that I feel very happy about. I think that crafting good questions is so important these days. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to field them now. But just as a reminder, you will be receiving a link to watch this video back later. And you will also be able to access our previous webinars as well as this webinar on our YouTube page. So feel free to look up Playbook UX on YouTube for some videos on helpful practices and research, as well as our previous webinars. Also, if you have feedback or are interested in webinar topics, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We're working on doing these monthly, so we are always open to ideas and we want to hear from you. We want to know what makes it the most useful for you as well. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. And finally, last thing before we start answering questions as well, if you are a user of Playbook UX, please consider reviewing us on G2. This just helps us get valuable feedback and makes us or helps us understand where areas that we can improve the product and make it better for everyone. So if you have questions on how to get that started, or if you would like a link to access G2 to set up a review, let us know and we can definitely get that sent your way. Awesome. So I will stick around for a few minutes here. If anybody has any questions, you can definitely feel free to post them in the chat. And if anybody joined us later, I will repost the links that I mentioned throughout. We have the Playbook UX Academy, which is specifically this page is about popular questions, but we have a ton of really great resources in here. So I'm going to post that in the chat right now. And then I also spoke about a study guide that I had kind of helped create from scratch. This is one that was actually completed on our tester landing page experience. So it provided a bunch of different types of questions and how we set it up in Playbook UX. So feel free to take a look at that. You can also utilize some of those questions for your own research if you're looking to do a first impression study. So I'm posting that in the chat as well, just in case somebody hasn't seen that. But I will stick around. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them. Otherwise, it was so lovely seeing you all. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Jamie. I saw your clapping. Thanks so much. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Adolfo. We appreciate it. For anybody still joining us, I did want to mention the popular questions is actually a new feature. So if you've used us before, um, this is something that we launched this week, which I'm very excited about. So if that looked new to you, it is because it is for sure new. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions on how that works or the types of questions that we have in there. I'm happy to walk through a demo, and our team is happy to answer any questions that you might have about that. And one thing I should also mention too, if you're still around, if you have any feedback on different types of tests, or if you have questions that you like to use in your studies that you feel comfortable sharing with us, definitely reach out to us because we always want to improve the usability of, popular questions and templates and things like that. We want to make sure that it's open for everyone. So if you do have any feedback on different types of questions to use, definitely reach out to us anytime and we're happy to work with you on that as well. Awesome. With that, I will go ahead and end the stream today, but I thank you so much for everybody who's still with us and hanging on to the last to end here. I appreciate you so much and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.